there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And it is Gothic Literature Month over here at Fully Booked. So, what better way to talk about Gothic fiction than to really talk about all the elements and what makes it Gothic fiction versus, you know, most other kinds of, let's say, like horror.
Yeah.
Or
Where's
like
the
speculative types of fiction. That's it. Where's the line? What are the elements that you're expecting when you pick up a Gothic novel or something that people have told you is Gothic fiction, for instance?
What sends it into Horrorville?
Yeah, that's it. And in certain cases, how Gothic doesn't always have to be straight horror necessarily either, depending on what you're thinking of, because there are a lot of classifications of Gothic fiction that aren't necessarily straight horror stories, right? So we're going to get into all of that today.
Yes.
What are you thinking of right now?
Nothing. I'm trying not to yawn.
Oh my god. Shireen's so conscious of it now. Sorry. But before we get into all of that, Shireen, is there anything on your nightstand right now?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am. That's fine. That's fair.
Megan, anything on your nightstand?
I'm just about to finish. I'm like maybe 3/4 of the way through The Quiet Tenant.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right now. Very tense.
Is that one a spooky horror?
Serial killer.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Very tense, very scary. Like those are the things like I have different kinds of like horror kind of, you know, like freak me out in different ways. And everybody I find has like certain subgenres that kind of freak them out more than others, right? Like especially when you're watching movies and stuff. I'm much more afraid of like the more sort of real world types of things where it's like a real killer or someone that I'm like, fuck, like this could actually happen. Like that scares me. And that's why like, you know, like true crime is more scary, I find, than other types of things. Whereas my fiance, for instance, he's really, really bothered by like possession stuff.
Oh, really?
Like good, like possession stuff. It creeps him out.
He loves like a good sci-fi horror, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's into it. Give him like scary aliens and stuff, and he can do like real world like killers, like no problem, whatever, nothing. It's when you get into like possessions and like certain types of hauntings. He really doesn't like creepy little kids.
Oh, really? Okay.
He's not a big fan of that.
Fair enough.
Those are kind of like his things. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Gothic fiction.
Quite.
So, okay, when you pick up a book that supposedly, or, you know, like in certain cases looks like it's probably going to be Gothic fiction, what are you expecting to find?
And like this is like, so the thing with Gothic for me is that it's like I always find that you don't really know what you're about to get, right? Like it's a little bit like, okay, I'm definitely expecting like some sort of haunted house, or
The house better be spooky ooky.
yeah, like there better be some sort of like property.
It's very
like
large,
haunted.
dark, and ominous, I guess.
Like I guess you could have like a haunted hospital or a school or something. Like,
I think
that
a school
could be
would
Gothic.
work for sure.
Yeah. I'm definitely expecting some sort of, I don't know if I would say necessarily a ghost, but something, but in the plot that they think a ghost is
I can
around.
see that. Yeah.
And then as I was saying to you, everybody is just like, for some reason, everybody's a little cray-cray.
A little bit crazy.
In a Gothic story. Like, inexplicably so. You're like, why are you so cray-cray? And everybody just is, you know, whether it's a result of the haunting or, like, they are doing the haunting themselves or something or other. That is kind of what I expect when I'm reading a Gothic story. It's funny because if you look back, like, at old, like, Gothic fiction that was written either by women... Yeah, usually by women.
Oftentimes.
It's almost satirical because they're kind of making fun of the fact that, like, you know, a woman who's emotional gets, like, sent away for being crazy.
Well, I think because a big, a big element of a lot of Gothic fiction is, like, a damsel in distress character, quote unquote. And often the distress part for the damsel is that if there is some sort of haunting or haunted element to the story, she's driven mad by it and, you know, needs to be like, you know, that's it, like taken away or whatever the situation is.
And it's often like because of something to do with her womanhood.
Yes.
So whether it's like because she was a mother and she lost her children or like, you know, like normally it kind of floats around that type of topic. So that's kind of what I expect when I pick up a Gothic book. And then if it's a movie, then like a lot of blue tones. And
everything's blue and gray and dark looking in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, there's always I mean, you can say this about a lot of stuff. There's always some sort of mystery to be solved. Like there's always, because it's always like, is there actually a ghost here? Who are they? If we already know, why are they here? What is their purpose? What are they doing? How do I fix this?
Yeah.
You know?
There's always like a fix. Like we need to like break the curse, or we have to make
you
the
always
ghost
have to break
go
the fucking
away.
curse. There's always a curse.
Like something like that. Yeah.
True. Yes. And that's it. And because it's always, let's say, okay, probably most of the time when we think of it, I would say we think that there's normally a ghost or a spectral type of character, but there can also be like a monster. Like if you think of Frankenstein, for instance, right? Like the creature, like the monster in Frankenstein, or in Dracula,
right?
You know, same kinds of things, same kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Like a type of monster. My monster, I'm expanding to like, that's it, vampires, werewolves, like all those types of like other creatures and things like that. Like I'm not thinking straight up of like a Frankenstein's monster. I'm thinking of just like
monsters in general.
Yes, but still something that has a very still something that has a very Gothic sensibility, in the sense of a big old spooky house, and an element and an atmosphere of like negativity, really, like tension and like unpleasantness in some way, shape, or form. And oftentimes I find that while the female character, the female lead, is crazy or goes crazy at some point, the male character doesn't necessarily go crazy, but he like shoulders the burdens of the entire world. It seems, you know what I mean? Like he's very like put upon, almost.
But a lot of the time it's because of him that
exactly
all this is
like
happening.
It's, again, if you think like Frankenstein's like a really good example of that, right? Because he, you know, goes through all of this. Victor Frankenstein creates this monster, and then is writing about like his failure basically, and how he like wasn't able to do what he wanted to do perfectly and things like that. So they're always very put upon. There's just always a lot of that, I find. Apparently technically, the first work to ever say that it was like a Gothic style novel was a novel by an author named Horace Walpole, which called The Castle of Otranto, which was published in it was published in 1764. And it was subsequently retitled as a Gothic story, apparently.
So if I'm not mistaken, now I might be mistaken, but like this is like jogging some memories here. I believe that in Northanger Abbey, written by Jane Austen, the main character is reading The Castle of Thingy. And that's what's making her feel eerie and weird when she's in the Abbey, because she's been reading this book and she's like feeling like this like spookiness happening.
Yes. No, I think you might be right. I think
So I would like, even though Northanger Abbey, I think it falls under Gothic, I often feel like it's like Gothic adjacent.
It is a little bit, because it's partially making fun of it to a certain extent, and like making fun of like that type of fiction. So I think that there's more of an element probably of satire, but within, it's still within technically that Gothic kind of sphere.
Absolutely. And it's still a main female character. And don't they accuse her of going mad? Anyway, I'd have to go back and read it. But,
I think so.
Yeah. Yes. So that was the first work of Gothic fiction.
Yeah. So that was the first one that I think was like officially dubbed like this is Gothic fiction, was the Castle of Otranto specifically. Which was, that's it, like published like in the 18th century. And then that would be probably followed, I'd say, like the 19th century and like the Victorian era and things. Those were the times where like it really picked up a lot of steam. Right? Because you also round up like a lot of like even people who primarily like the Romantic era, like poets and things like that, would write like a lot of Gothic types of stories.
They dip their toe in it. And I find that like there's also a lot of Gothic that goes over to the metaphysical too. There was a lot of that going on. I think they tried to use the Gothic as a way of like commenting on like society.
To an extent, I think that's true.
And it was like just kind of a reflection of the questions that we ask ourselves of like, you know, why are we here? Like, you know, what's our purpose? That kind of thing. And, you know, having these stories that are like about hauntings and, you know, if you take an author like Shirley Jackson, who just looks very specifically at like the Gothic relationships that we have in our lives. It's all a very big commentary and like a self-reflection, even if you're really reading it the way that it should be read, I think.
And I think that actually, like, even if you look earlier, like before Shirley Jackson, as far as a primarily Gothic writer, let's say, who focuses more like very heavily on relationships between characters and things. So even if there is no haunting, it still feels like a Gothic novel. Like the Brontë sisters would be a really good example of that, with things like Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering.
It just sounds so funny when you say it.
But it is.
If anybody British ever listens to this and that's actually how you pronounce it, Wuthering Heights in the UK, I would love to know that, because it's just me laughing at it from my own
but it's true though. Like it all takes place in like these like moors and like marshes and like just the setting is very spooky.
It's just damp,
and
soggy everywhere,
and smelly,
and everything just smells a little bit
like
rank.
The best place to hide a dead body, like
Yeah, actually, I mean, like in a marsh or a bog or whatever. Actually, have you guys ever heard of like bog bodies? Like that's a thing.
Ew.
Yeah. Okay. So this is like a really weird tangent. I'm sorry. Apparently, in certain parts, I think maybe in Northern Ireland and also like in Scandinavian countries, in these bogs, like peat moss bogs, there have been remains discovered in several different areas, as though, I don't know, like if people were maybe executed at that time and then their bodies were disposed of in the bogs, but because of something to do with the fermentation, because of the peat moss, they're very well preserved, and it turns all of their hair ginger, which is also super fucking weird. Yeah, so bizarre, but that's just like an interesting thing.
I'm surprised that this has not turned into like a whole new genre of horror.
I don't know. You could probably do something like that, though. Someone write it. Wait, no, I claim it. I'm claiming it.
Bog body horror.
Bog body horror. That would be fun. I thought that was fascinating when I like listened to a whole podcast episode about it, and I was like, wow, that's really interesting to hear about.
No, totally. But like as we're talking about like, these settings where, I'm thinking about the stories where the haunting is just coming from like the person's guilt.
It's coming from inside the house.
Yeah, like it's coming from inside the house.
But there's no ghost.
Or it's coming from like inside the person's like conscience or something.
Well, you get that with Poe.
Poe, like the telltale heart, right? Like you committed murder and now it's like coming back to haunt you.
Yeah.
It's not actually beating under the floorboards, but you think it is.
No, but it feels like it is, like, and that's it. And it's the guilt of that, basically. And I'm trying to think, what's it called? I'm trying to think, like the Fall of the House of Usher is very much like up there with like the Gothic speculative fiction in that way too, because it's, about like this old, like creepy ass old house that's basically falling apart. I don't know if, side note, is anybody really looking forward to The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix? It seems like it's going to be very cool.
Apparently it's like a new take on it.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
If you watch the trailer, it's the Usher family are like a crime syndicate, basically, and it's sort of like their pasts coming back to haunt them in a way. But there are elements of several different Poe stories that are woven into it, seems, because I noticed some stuff that was like, obviously like The Raven. I think there was like a Telltale Heart kind of thing, indication in the trailer, Mask of the Red Death. Like there were several different things kind of rolled into there. It looks great. It looks really cool. I don't know if it's already out by the time you guys are hearing this episode, but I'm really looking forward to listening to it. I think it's going to be really rad, and Mike Flanagan knows what he's doing, and he's one who takes Gothic and makes it modern in a way that still works.
Job. Yeah.
Like we've seen it with Hill House, Bly Manor, and now this.
He's doing a great job. Like it's like if anybody's gonna revive Gothic fiction, it's this guy.
I think it's
like,
gonna be Mike Flanagan for like a modern audience,
like Gothic on our screens. Let's say, because I do. Well, anyway, I don't want to like go too much into this, but So sorry. Edit that out. I was about to make a whole commentary about like modern versus
we'll talk about it in the
that's
next
why
episode.
I edit this whole part out.
That's fine.
But yeah, like I just think that like a lot of like, Gothic style, you've got these elements of, it's that haunting element that it comes back to, where
even if there is no haunting per se, no actual haunting,
by
the
ghost.
Characters are haunted by something. It could be something physical, it could be something metaphysical, it could be something psychological,
it could be their trauma, it could be their families,
their past,
it could be like anything,
it could be that's it, the specter of something hangs over them, even if there's no actual physical specter that is haunting them in some way, and even if you even if you look at something like types of stories where that's it, it's like the battle of oneself, like the case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a lot like that, right?
Yeah.
Two sides to a person, and how, you know, your just yourself and your choices that you're making can like destroy you,
right?
Basically, I think those are like really good kinds of examples of things like that. And I think, you know, that's it when you get into Poe, and even probably to an extent like maybe like Nathaniel Hawthorne, like some things like, you know, certain things like that, are the authors like that who
House of the Seven Gables.
Yeah, that's it. Who like wrote these stories that, again, off the cuff, you wouldn't necessarily have been like, yes, this is Gothic fiction because it's like, you know, there's like people are haunted and this and that and the other. That's not necessarily what it is. It could be, it's just like the characters. You see that in, what am I thinking of right now? Oh, right. You see that in Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier.
I was going to bring that one up. Yeah, Rebecca. Yeah.
That's a great example of being haunted by one's past.
Yeah.
And in the case of the narrator, the lead character, being haunted by uncertainty. She doesn't know what's going on for the first like 2/3 of the story.
And there's always a lot of that in Gothic. I find like there's a lot of like uncertainty.
There's
like,
a lot of mystery. They really have to uncover a lot of what's happened.
You got to like be patient. You got to be in for the ride, because it's not one of those genres where like as a reader you're privy to more information than the characters. Like you're very much in the dark, where to the point where the characters know more than you do. And you're sitting there really scratching your head going, why is everybody acting this way? Like this doesn't make sense. So it's like the mystery side of it is like pushed further than even like many other genres, you know, like if you take mystery itself, you know, you have like a starting point that's going to trigger your whole mystery, where you have to, you know, you got clues that you're looking for. In Gothic, you don't even know what the mystery is.
And you don't know that there's a mystery until like a little ways into the story, oftentimes.
Like you don't know what clues you're looking for because you're not really sure what's going on.
No, that's it. And like the narrator in Rebecca, that's pretty much what she has to deal with, right? Like the second, that's it, Mrs. whatever the hell, I forget. She doesn't have a name. She's just the second wife.
Yeah. We did consider doing an episode on Rebecca, but
and then nobody. But then of course
is in that one.
We'd have to watch the old movie,
right?
With whatever the hell his name is there anyway, Laurence Olivier. Yeah, we would have had to watch the old one, which we haven't gotten around to. I've seen it, but it's been a long time, and nobody wants to watch that new version because Armie Hammer's ruined a lot for people. So
how dare he?
I know,
because that was a decent movie.
It was all right. It was fine. It was okay.
It
was an okay adaptation.
I did say decent.
It was an okay adaptation. It's fine. Yeah, and I mean, like that's it. Actually, speaking of, if we think about this irony that's it, Mike Flanagan really seems to be into this whole like Gothic fiction being sort of remade for a more modern audience to a certain extent. That's it, like, you know, because he's done it already with The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Bly Manor, if you guys didn't know, is based on The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which is another very much like a very Gothic piece as well. And The Fall of the House of Usher, obviously. And then when you get into Shirley Jackson stuff, both Hill House, We've Always Lived in the Castle, and even there are probably some other like more contemporary ones that we can, you know, get into a little bit later on in the month, obviously, if we talk about it. But even if I'm thinking about more recent, Anne Rice is very much like a Gothic writer, or was a Gothic writer, I feel. A lot of her stuff, like her, you know, like Vampire Chronicles and things like that, have a very Gothic sensibility to them.
But that's where you start kind of towing that line and going over into horror.
You do
with Anne Rice, like she kind of flip flops a lot.
I guess I feel it's maybe her aesthetic is Gothic.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying like it's interesting like to take someone like Anne Rice, because it's like you'd have to do like a whole analysis on her writing style, because it's like there are Gothic elements, but at the same time, there's a lot of horror in her writing. So it's like, how would you classify that type of writing? And I think that there's a lot that falls into that bucket. Because, you know, when you're talking about Gothic, you're talking about haunting, you're talking about ghosts. And then you start thinking, okay, but now am I in the supernatural?
Yeah.
Because a lot of Gothic doesn't actually have any supernatural elements. No. It's just an assumed supernatural element.
Like, look at what we were talking about. We're talking about Wuthering Heights. We're talking about Rebecca. We're talking about Jane Eyre. Like, none of those have a ghost in them. No, none of those are like a ghost
It's just
story.
Like an assumed ghost, you know? And like, you know, something I thought about a second ago was you've got a lot of books that aren't of Gothic genre, but they have elements of Gothic in them. So, like, I'm thinking of To Kill a Mockingbird with, what's his name? Boo Radley. Who lives in the really spooky house, and he's really scary, and, like, they think
and
that
the kids
something...
think that he's evil and he's horrible and stuff, but it turns out he's lovely.
He's lovely and he's fine. So, like, they kind of take this and they insert it in a lot of stories.
Because as soon as you add a Gothic element, you're like, ooh. Okay, I've upped the atmosphere here.
And it is. It's a commentary on our society, and it really if you do read Gothic the way that it's supposed to be read, you're supposed to really think about what you're reading, you know, and what's being said and happening.
Yeah, because the much of the time anyway, particularly in like the older, like the classics, the language that's being used to describe the situation that's occurring is very purposeful. It's done with meaning. Nothing's just there for the sake of being there. Like, it means something within the context of what the characters are experiencing.
Right.
Yeah. It's always it's just an interesting genre to kind of dip your toe into, you know, every once in a while. I am glad that it's something that's like persisted. Like, it's something that we do still see in very different ways, but that we do still kind of see on a regular basis, and that people, every once in a while, we seem to have like this little resurgence of people who want to revisit these types of titles and properties. I'm hoping that The Fall of the House of Usher is just going to give everybody a new Edgar Allan Poe kick of some sort.
You're like, I've been waiting for this.
Well, so we've had, in the past couple of years, he's getting a little bit of a resurgence because there have been like a couple of like Poe, like fictionalized biopic types of things in different cases. There was one, both of them have been about Poe as like a younger man, like prior to writing, particularly at the beginning of this year. There would have been The Pale Blue Eye, which was released on Netflix, in which Poe plays like a sort of a side character technically, and isn't the lead character of the story, but that's a fictionalized take on his time in the military when that's it, like an inspector is looking into several deaths in a small village, and sort of joins forces with Poe, who would have been a young cadet at the time, in order for them to look into the reality of what's actually happening to the people in this town. It wasn't great, but I didn't.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm like, I don't think you've told me about this.
No,
one.
I didn't love it. But anyway, but I will say that, like, you know, I feel like that's it. Like, in the past, like 3 years, there have been like 3 or 4 newer like Poe properties that have just, or like versions with him in them specifically, that have kind of popped up. And I'm hoping that, like, you know, with The Fall of the House of Usher, we get another little like resurgence of things. It would be fun. It would be interesting to get and take like different people's takes on these stories and what they mean.
Let's get an adaptation of The Pit and the Pendulum. I don't think there's been one yet.
Oh, I think I saw a pendulum swinging somewhere in that trailer
for
The Fall of the House of Usher.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, because it really does incorporate like quite a few of the stories. So I think that you're going to see elements of a lot of different things, and that you might not even realize what all of them are when you're actually watching it. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be awesome. And I'm just looking. I like to pick up a Gothic novel every once in a while and just kind of, you know, get back into like that vibe of things. I've read 1 or 2 this year, and I think I might read 1 or 2 more that are kind of in that style before the end of the year. So I'm looking forward to that always.
Yeah, it's not typically a genre that I pick up very often because I do love the supernatural. Yeah. And like we've said, it doesn't necessarily have supernatural elements in it, so I always find myself being disappointed, you know?
You get to the end of it, you're like, oh, man.
There were no ghosties.
No, that's it. This didn't do what I wanted it to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd rather watch it, you know? I'd rather watch Gothic stories.
Yeah.
So very excited about the Poe adaptation.
For sure. So do you guys read Gothic fiction on a regular basis? Is it something that you've never really picked up, or maybe you've read some of the stories before and not even necessarily realized that this was like, it kind of fell into the realm of Gothic fiction? But you can let us know about that over on Instagram, Threads, and on TikTok at FullyBookedCA. You can also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/book was way better. And if you're still here with us, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening, because it really helps us get the episodes out in front of more people. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.